I wasn't even planning to do another election law video this week until YouTube announced this new policy. Do you think maybe they've heard of the Streisand effect? Coming up on Legal Bytes. Hey everyone, welcome to Legal Bytes. I'm Alyte, I'm a lawyer, and on this channel we explain the law one bite at a time. So YouTube just announced a new policy regarding election videos, and they also outlined how they're going to enforce that policy. And as usually happens when YouTube announces some sort of a change in their policy, people reacted with, in this video, we're going to talk about what the new policy is, what it means, and how it likely will be enforced, as well as my thoughts on the policy and on some of the reactions to the policy. And just a hint, we are going to touch a little bit on Section 230 as well. And I know YouTube generally doesn't like videos made about YouTube's policies, so this video could be demonetized or under the new policy could get taken down, even though I really do think that we keep things as reasonable and fact-based as possible. But if it does, well then, it is what it is, I guess. I'm still gonna talk about it because I think it's important, and I think that there are a lot of people out there that care about this stuff as well. Okay, let's start with what it is. So we have a tweet here that announced a new policy. It says, yesterday was the safe harbor deadline and enough states have certified their election results to determine a president-elect. This means the 2020 US presidential election is now a past election under our policies. Read how this is being enforced. Now, it's not a past election, but we'll get into that in a second. Anyway, then there's a link to where they outline the policy. We'll drop a link to the tweet in the description below, as well as all of the other pages we show in this video. So that link from the tweet leads us to a page called Spam, Deceptive Practices, and Scams Policies. So now before we get into the text of the policy, it's important to note that what we're dealing with here is a private company that provides a service, and that service is access to the social media platform that features user-generated videos. As big as YouTube is, and as big as Google is, which owns YouTube, it's not a part of the government, so they are free to generally do business as they please. And when you sign up to use the YouTube platform, you agree to the terms in several agreements. Those are the terms of service, or terms of use, and the community guidelines. And make no mistake about it, these are contracts that you, the user, have agreed to in order to use the platform. Even if you never read these terms and you never explicitly agreed to them, just by using the platform, you're implicitly agreeing to the terms. And as you can see here, YouTube's community guidelines has policies on a number of subjects, including playlists, fake engagement, links in contact, impersonation, and spam, deceptive practices, and scams policies. And so here, within the spam, deceptive practices, and scams policies, there's a box highlighting a new policy added to this section, which is related to this election. So starting from the top, it says, the safety of our creators, viewers, and partners is our highest priority, and we look to each of you to help us protect this unique and vibrant community. It's important you understand our community guidelines and the role they play in our shared responsibility to keep YouTube safe. Please take the time to carefully read the policy below. You can also check out this page for a full list of our guidelines. So I think we can all agree that safety is a good goal to have on any social media platform. And with that, let's read on. So now it says, on December 9th, we started applying our presidential election integrity policy below to the 2020 US presidential election, meaning we remove content that misleads people by alleging that widespread fraud or errors changed the outcome of the 2020 US presidential election uploaded on or after December 9th. As we ramp up our enforcement, we'll remove violative videos without giving a strike. We will begin issuing strikes for new content uploaded after Inauguration Day, January 20th, 2021. So then we scroll down to the policies section, and we can see that they've added into this section a policy on presidential election integrity. And here it says that YouTube says not to post content that advances false claims that widespread fraud, errors, or glitches changed the outcome of any past US presidential election. Note, this applies to elections in the United States only. I have no idea why they would say that in particular, but it is an oddity in the least. For the US 2020 election, this applies to content uploaded on or after December 9th, 2020. So that's what it says, but before I get deeper into it, this video is brought to you by Andy the Game Maker. Their debut game, Crypto Cartel, a card game, is a ton of fun. It's a resource development game set in the dark, less than legal world of the international black market, funded by cryptocurrency. A link to the game is in the description below, and if you want free shipping, use the promo code LEGAL. Okay, back to the video. So, according to these terms, content that violates this policy includes content with false claims alleging that the 2020 election was rigged, the 2016 election was rigged, the 2000 election was rigged, or that any of the contentious elections in American history were rigged or involved voter fraud, errors in counting, or system glitches. Now, note that it says specifically false claims of widespread fraud, errors, or glitches changing the outcome of the election. So, by the terms of the policy, if there actually was fraud, let's say in a prior election, that's being covered by a historian who's creating content with the highest degree of professionalism, it should be acceptable under these terms. However, what's concerning is that this policy doesn't say exactly how it's decided that a claim is true or false. Now, your reaction to this is likely to be determined somewhat by how much you buy into the claims that the election was stolen from Donald Trump or that Donald Trump is trying to steal the election from Joe Biden. But really, when it comes to the soundness of a policy, it's my personal belief that it really shouldn't matter what side of an argument you're on. You should be able to expect the same application of that policy to you no matter where you are on a political spectrum. And regardless of where you stand, you should also be concerned about how a certain policy can be misused through its ambiguities. And so one thing that concerns me as a lawyer, especially with respect to content creators, is the way that the truth is determined under this policy. Now, my years as a litigator have trained me to think of truth as something that you arrive at through a process. One side gives one argument, and then the other side gives another. Whoever has the better argument and the stronger evidence should win. Now, when you put on a trial, it is true that not all information gets to come into the courtroom to be submitted to the jury. Some information is kept out because it can mislead the jury or prejudice the jury, or it simply would just waste everyone's time because it's simply not relevant. But there are rules that govern the process of deciding what comes in and what stays out, and those are the rules of evidence. I'm not here to say that those rules are perfect by any means, but both parties have access to those rules, and both parties know that they can rely on the judge applying those rules evenly. And then after it's been decided what evidence comes in and what stays out, it's all put in front of a jury so that they can determine what's believable and what's not, what's credible or what's simply untrustworthy. And the presentation of that evidence for the jury is also highly regulated. The way an attorney conducts a direct examination of their own witness is different than the way that they do a cross-examination for an opposing witness. And there's good reason for all of that. It's designed to give the jury all of the relevant information and to allow them to discard what they think is incorrect and to point at what they think is the most salient and to say, I think this side should win. Now, juries don't always get it right, and the legal system definitely has plenty of issues that it needs to work out. But having a process at least allows us to trust that there's some way that we can all expect to arrive at the truth, or at least some version of it. Now, in this policy, we have no idea how YouTube will choose which claims are false or true, at least in terms of the policy anyway. They haven't included in this section any way that anyone can rely on it to arrive at the truth. Now, it could totally be that they have a perfectly legitimate process of fact-checking behind the scenes that they use and is totally unbiased and works great. That said, there do exist in human history examples of official information sources outright lying about very important events.
You didn't see graphite.
I did.
You didn't. You didn't! Because it's not there.
It's happened before, and it could happen again. So looking back at this policy, I first want to make it very clear that I'm not advocating for or against any claims about election fraud in the 2020 election. I think I've made it very clear that on this channel, we're aiming to present content that's as unbiased as possible and based on facts and reason. And I totally get it, by the way. We don't want to have a continuing cloud over the United States that lasts until the next 4 years where we're still arguing over who won the election. But without knowing how it's determined that claims are true or false, as a content creator, I can't really trust that by researching diligently and making all kinds of disclaimers and being as reasonable as possible, I'm able to safeguard my content from somehow violating the policy. Really, the only real way to do that is to not talk about elections at all. And that's really a concern for two main reasons. First, as I illustrated in our last video, the election doesn't end on November 3rd or a week after November 3rd, or even at the safe harbor deadline referenced in YouTube's tweet. And if there's anyone from YouTube watching this, I'm citing my references here. This is taken directly from the Electoral Count Act, which says that on January 6th, Congress tallies up the electoral votes and goes through a whole process of determining whether to accept or reject them. If you want to see more about this, check out our videos on the Electoral College and on the tallying of the electoral votes. Link in the description below. So yes, enough states have now certified that we can probably reasonably expect that Joe Biden is going to win enough electoral votes to become our next president. And if you saw our last video, you know that I don't really expect there to be much room for there to be a change in direction from a Biden presidency. That said, it's my personal opinion that the policy itself is, well, a little misleading. Can I say that? I know, it's ironic because YouTube says that they're trying to prevent misinformation and whatnot, and so I kind of feel like I'm sticking my neck out here a little bit by saying this. Please don't take this down, YouTube. I think it's misleading because it makes it seem like the safe harbor deadline is the end of the election process, when it's not. Congress still has to tally up the votes and determine if they're keeping all of those electoral votes. And even if the outcome ultimately stays the same, which it probably will, it's still important not to confuse people about the election process. And it's important to allow people to continue commenting on the process while it's ongoing. Which leads me to the other reason why I find the effect of this policy a little bit concerning. Generally speaking, in the United States, we tend to believe it's better to have greater openness in our speech. Obviously, as I mentioned before, YouTube is not some arm of the federal government, so the First Amendment doesn't apply to YouTube. To be clear, the First Amendment prevents the government from making laws that will infringe our freedom of speech. It says absolutely nothing about individuals or corporations hampering our ability to express ourselves. So in all reality, if this video got somehow taken down, I would have no recourse under the First Amendment. But even with that aside, there are still certain values that culturally Americans hold that can be found in some Supreme Court opinions on the First Amendment. Those include Justice Brandeis, who wrote in a concurring opinion in Whitney v. California that when it comes to unpopular speech, more often than not, the best remedy is more speech, not enforced silence. And another Supreme Court Justice, Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., he coined the term marketplace of ideas, which basically says that we should throw all of our ideas out there to compete with one another so that the best ones rise to the top, essentially. Anyway, there's real value in the concept of the marketplace of ideas. People can be convinced of their own genius by the thoughts that they have in their head, but it isn't until they verbalize those thoughts and put them against other ideas until they realize that either, yeah, that was a really great idea, or no, I really need to work on that idea. And when it comes to something as important as our elections, we should be able to talk about it. Ideally with civility, of course, but I mean, yeah, I understand things can get heated when people are very passionate about these important topics. And there's always something that we can learn from controversies, including controversial elections. After all, controversies are how case law gets developed. Laws usually become clearer over time, not because we've gotten better at reading the language in a statute. Rather, it's usually because there have been enough controversies that have led to litigation, which have caused the courts to interpret the law and apply it in different situations. The more litigation you have, the clearer the law becomes over time. On the flip side, you'll find that lawyers often have a harder time advising their clients on a brand new law or a brand new issue that no court has ever looked at before. Basically, what I'm getting at is, I get it, we don't want misinformation spreading. I think we can all agree that we don't want misinformation or lies spreading like wildfire, especially when it comes to the validity of our elections. And at some point, we have to agree that the contest is over and we're moving on. But I disagree with the date that YouTube has used here, and aside from that, my concern is the way in which it'll be applied, because it's not so clear by the terms of how they're getting there. And there's a final bit here that I want to address. So I noticed on Twitter that, as is often the case when a social media platform does something that's unpopular, a lot of people responded with comments on Section 230. Specifically, that's 47 U.S. Code Section 230, the part of the Communications Decency Act that gives internet providers and social media platforms immunity from liability. It's very controversial, and Donald Trump has talked about it a lot. He wants to get rid of it. Other politicians have talked about getting rid of it as well. We gave the background on Section 230 in one of our first videos that we published over the summer. So if you want to see background on where it came from and what President Trump's executive order over the summer aims to do with Section 230, be sure to check out that video. Link is in the description. But basically, under Section 230, social media platforms can't be treated as a publisher or a speaker of any information that's posted by any user on the platform. In other words, they can't be held responsible for what an individual decides to post on the platform. Also, under Section 230, social media platforms can't be held liable for moderating content on the platform in good faith when that content is considered to be obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable, regardless of whether or not it's constitutionally protected. Social media platforms also can't be held liable for creating or making available to the users of the platform any of the tools for moderating the content themselves. Those include tools like removing posts from your Facebook wall or removing comments from a YouTube video. And the case law in Section 230 has generally shown that this immunity is pretty strong, meaning that in a lot of cases, courts have upheld the immunity. Now, it's true that outside of good faith moderation, Section 230 does not necessarily protect intentional acts by the social media platform. Like, for example, if Twitter's official accounts were to tweet out disparaging or defamatory messages about individuals. Now, I noticed on Twitter that there were a number of people that responded to YouTube's tweet about the change in the policy by talking about how this policy change makes YouTube the quote-unquote publisher or otherwise opens them up to liability. To put it quite simply, neither of those are true. The policy change, which adds a section on the presidential election integrity, while controversial, does nothing to open them up to liability. The policy change is related to the way in which they're moderating the platform. In other words, the way that they're moderating the content of other individuals. So I would say that it falls pretty squarely within the protections of Section 230. But anyway, what do you guys think? Am I making too big of a deal about the date that YouTube has chosen for the new policy? Are you more of the mind that people should be deplatformed rather than opening things up in the quote-unquote marketplace of ideas? Do you think that I'm misinterpreting Section 230 here? Let us know in the comments. Either way, I hope you found this informative, and if you did, we'd really appreciate it if you liked this video. It definitely would help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you're new here and you want to see more videos talking about the law and pop culture topics of all kinds, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell so you can find out when our next video is uploaded. Thanks.